Hey guys, we're going to change gears a little bit. We've been talking about history, but today we're going to talk about something else that's on your list of things you're supposed to know about Texas this year, and it has to do with our government. Our government helps make our laws and enforce the laws, make sure the laws are fair. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how that works today. And we're mostly going to focus this week and next week on how that works in Texas because we really just pretty much talk about Texas in fourth grade. But in order to understand how that works in fourth grade in Texas, we also need to go back a little bit and review some things you learned in third grade about the United States government. So, first of all, this picture I showed you at the beginning of the year is pretty important. This is a place in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania called Independence Hall. And this is the place where the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were both signed in this room. And you might, if you think about it, we went back to, if you go back to the beginning of the year when we talked about the Declaration and the Constitution, we talked about the Declaration, and you heard the song "It's Too Late to Apologize." Remember, the Declaration is where the United States broke up with England, and we talked about that chair. Remember that George Washington sat in when they wrote the Constitution. And remember Ben Franklin, when he came up to sign it, he said, "I've been wondering if the sun was going to rise or set on our country this whole time." And I see now that the sun is just rising once they figured out the Constitution. But both of those were signed in this place. Now, think back again to that time when we learned about that and the reasons why they broke up with King George. We learned the first five of them. Remember, we said that they were upset because they kept getting thrown in prison if they spoke up against the king or if they didn't go by his religion. And he took their guns away from them, and he would send soldiers to live in their house and all of these things. And that's where the Bill of Rights came from in our Constitution. Remember the first five of the Bill of Rights, where you have the right to freedom of speech, press, and religion, the right to bear arms. No quarter is allowed, which means the government can't just force soldiers to live in your house. No searches without a seizure, and your right to remain silent. And so the founding fathers didn't want to risk having a bad leader again. And they decided that if they divided up the power and design a method of checks and balances, that they would be able to limit the ability of bad people to ruin our country. They didn't want one king or one person or one group to come in and ruin the country like King George did. So they spent a lot of time trying to decide, how can we divide up that power so that won't happen again? So what they came up with wasn't all originally their idea. Some of these ideas came from Rome and ancient Greece. They weren't all original ideas, but because our founding fathers had done a lot of reading and a lot of studying of history, they said, let's take some of these really good ideas from other civilizations and let's use them in our government. So they came up with an idea of three branches. We call them branches because they're like three branches on one tree. Each of these branches is a part of something bigger, our United States government. The branches are called the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. The executive branch is made up of two parts, the House and the Senate. The executive branch is the president, the vice president, the president's cabinet, his helpers, and advisors. And the judicial branch is made up of the Supreme Court. Now, the legislative branch makes the laws of the United States. They're the ones that write them. They have to agree on them. And in our legislative branch for the United States, we have a bicameral system, which means we have two chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And those two parts have to agree in order for there to be a law. The reason we have two parts, if you think back to the beginning of the year, we read a play called The Great Compromise. Remember in that, when they were trying to decide how to get the representatives, they couldn't decide if they should have even numbers of representatives from every state, or if the representatives should be based on population. And they argued and they argued and argued. And I'll put a link up to that play if you want to go back and reread it. But that argument resulted with them not being able to decide. They think for the small states, it was more fair for every state to have an even number of representatives. And for the large states, it was more fair for the representatives to be based on population. So they decided as a compromise they would just do both. We'll have the Senate, where each state sends two, and the House, where each state sends representatives based on their population. So California and Texas have some of the biggest populations, so we send more representatives than a smaller state that doesn't have as many people, and that's our legislative branch. Our U.S. representatives from Texas are Bill Flores, and our senators are Johnny Cornyn and Ted Cruz. And I'll put these links up if you want to go to their pages. You can see what they look like. And also, if you want to, you can also send emails to them telling them what you think they should vote on and give them some ideas. Part of the great thing about our government is our representatives work for us. So part of our responsibility is to send our thoughts on what they're doing and how they should vote to them. So I'll put those links up in Google Classroom. If you wanted to send them an email, there's a place on there that you can click to do that. Our executive branch, its job is to carry out the laws. And a lot of times people get confused about that. Our executive branch, the leader of that is the president. Now, the president's job is to carry out and enforce the laws. He's supposed to tell the people what they are. He can make some rules in emergencies, but his job isn't to make all the laws. He's not the boss of us, really. The legislative branch is the one that makes the laws. Now, he can have ideas for laws, and he can tell the legislature, this is what I want you to do. But ultimately, his power is not in making and creating the laws, but in carrying them out. He also communicates with leaders around the world and tries to keep things peaceful. Our judicial branch, the job of the judicial branch is to explain the laws and make sure they are fair. And that actually helps us know a little bit about how the checks and balances work. That their whole part is about making sure the law is fair. That's why that branch exists. That is the Supreme Court, and it is run by the Supreme Court judges. All right, let's talk a little bit about the checks and balances. So our founders said, all right, let's see. If there's a bad president and he's really bad, he's doing things he's not supposed to, or she, of course, the president, of course, be a she. We haven't had one yet, but maybe one day. But if the president was doing something bad, how could our country stop that? Because we want to have a system where we can check on that and make sure all the power is balanced out. So here's how that works. If our president is doing something he's not supposed to do, the legislature can fire him. Okay, they have to have enough votes, and they have sort of like almost like a little trial. It's called the impeachment process. And so if he is impeached, he can be fired. Okay, so if the president gets fired for doing something bad, that's a responsibility of the legislative branch. Now, it's also our job as people in the United States too. So let's say we have a bad president and the legislative branch doesn't do anything about it, then it's our job to vote him out the next time. He can only be president for 4 years, and if as a country we don't agree with what that president is doing, then we don't keep him. We can vote for or her, and we can vote for someone else the next time. So those are two ways. If we have a president or someone in the executive branch that's not doing what they're supposed to, we can check on that and fix it. All right, what about if the legislative branch is bad and they're making really bad laws? You know, they're taking away our freedoms and they're making laws that go against what we want them to do. How can we stop that? How is that checked on? Well, that's checked on by the judicial branch. It's the judicial branch's job to make sure that the laws are fair. If they make a law that is unfair or is wrong in some way, the judicial branch can actually strike down that law and say, nope, this is not constitutional. We're not going to have that law at all. Another way that bad laws can be stopped is with the president. So if they make a law in the legislative branch, the president can veto it. He can say, nope, this is not going to become a law. So those are two ways that the legislative branch can be checked on. How is the judicial branch checked on? Well, the judicial branch is made up of Supreme Court judges, and they are elected in the United States Supreme Court for life. So once they become Supreme Court judges, they are on there until they either die or until they resign and retire. So these are very important jobs. So once they're there, they're checked on by each other. Okay, so they have to have a majority vote to make a decision. So some of the judges might disagree if there's like a bad judge on there. So it's very important that who we pick here is very carefully chosen. So what happens with that is the President of the United States picks the Supreme Court judge when there's an opening, but the legislative branch has to vote to agree to that. Okay, it's very hard for the President to get a Supreme Court judge in place if the legislative branch doesn't agree. And so those are some ways that everything can be checked on and balanced out if something goes wrong. Now, all of that depends on us because we get to vote on who gets in the legislative branch and we vote on who is in the executive branch. So those votes are very important because we want to make sure that we don't elect bad people to go there to begin with. So although the power is also split up between these three branches, the power of picking who those people are belongs to us. And so some of the responsibility for that also goes to us. So when you get big enough to vote, you want to make sure that you investigate and really think about those choices and that you participate in that. Another cool thing is that all of these branches are located in Washington, D.C. And I'm going to take us out of this for just a minute to show you where they are. The reason they're together is because they need to work together on all of this stuff. So let me kind of show you this little map. So this is a map of Washington, D.C. That's where the three branches of our United States government are located. This is my dream vacation. I really want to go here. But here's the White House. That's where the executive branch is. That's where the president is. And then if you go down a little ways, hold on, I think this map got bigger than it was. You got to go down a little bit. All right, and then over here is the library. Nope, that's not right. Sorry. Well, let me see. I had it on here earlier. Let me extend it out a little bit. Now I can't see where it is. All right, here's the White House. Here's the United States Capitol. So that's the legislative branch. That's where the House and the Senate are making the laws. And then right across the road a little bit is the Supreme Court of the United States. So you can see that they're all pretty close to each other in Washington, D.C. Now, the other thing that I want to talk to you about next time has to do with our state government. So the state government of Texas and our local government of Bosque County and Valley Mills also have three branches, and we'll be learning about those soon. If you have any questions, you can always drop them in a class comment, and I can't wait to hear what you think.